This is the regular meeting of the Northfield Public School Board. Today is Monday, October 26, 2020, and the time is 7 o'clock p.m. We are present this evening in the Northfield High School Media Center in accordance with Governor Walz's Stay Safe plan. This room has been set up in accordance with the plan's social distancing guidelines. In addition, all those present at the meeting will be wearing face coverings for the duration of the meeting. Also attending tonight's board meeting via teleconference are Erin Bailey, Director of Community Education, and Val Mertisdorf, Director of Finance. This meeting is open to the public via live stream. The recording of this meeting will be posted on the district website as soon as possible. Dr. Hillman, there were a number of items in the table file.
Yes, there are several items in the table file. There's some policy committee recommendations. There's an operations update that includes a preliminary report from our 30-day pulse survey, a number of appointments, and a leave of absence. And then I regrettably also need to request that the board remove individual action item number 1 this evening, the memorandum of understanding between the ALC, Randolph, and Tri-City United High Schools. We've been working to try to get our attorneys to review that MOU as the board had requested, and we just have not been successful as of yet. I talked with our attorney about 6 o'clock and just didn't feel we had enough time yet to be able to get that done. So we will bring that back. It's not time sensitive. It doesn't have to be done by this, but we try to be ahead of the game, but we just don't have all the data that you had requested, so we're just going to have to postpone that and remove that from the agenda this evening.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. If there's no objection to the adding these items to the agenda as we move forward, no objections. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Moved by Jeff. Is there a second? A second by Alan. All those in favor of the agenda as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Public comment. We now have an opportunity for residents, business, and property owners, parents, students, and employees of the Northfield Public School District to address the board. To accommodate the public comment portion of our meeting, we made available on the district's website the ability for the public to submit feedback to the board via email by 5 p.m. today. All submissions that follow the district policy regarding public comment would be read now by myself, board chair. We had no public comment submissions, so we can move on with announcements and recognitions. Dr. Hillman.
Yes, we have several this evening, or a few this evening. First, we want to thank Sheldall Flexible Technologies, who has been a supportive member of the Northfield and surrounding communities for the past 65 years. And as part of their commitment to support the local community and to support the health and safety of our children and staff, they donated 7,000 masks to local schools. 700 of those masks were donated to Northfield Public Schools, and we want to thank Sheldall for their commitment to safety for our children and our staff. So thanks to Sheldall. We have some really good news to report on the athletics front. Congratulations to our boys soccer team, who are the Section 1AA champions. And just by added note, they actually won the final 2 games in the Dundas Dome because the weather was, let's just say, early onset winter. And we were very fortunate to have that resource within our community so that we could just play those games locally under the bubble out in Dundas. And so congratulations to the Raiders class Section 1AA champions. While there's no cross-country state tournament this year, but 4 runners would have qualified for state: Martin Bryce, Nathan Amundsen, Nicole Tierbarth, and Anna Forbord. And so congratulations to those runners on what would have been a state berth. And in our girls swim and dive, Zibby Hannafel is the section diving champion. And the 200 medley relay of Lee Fossum, Lindsay Sunday, Ellen Bartley, and Anna Shaglowski broke the pool record by 1/10 of a second. So congratulations to them. And then I want to share with you that about a week or so, maybe 10 days ago, we got an email from head football coach Bubba Sullivan indicating that Northfield High School was going to take part in an initiative called Wear the Zero initiative. And what it is Rashad Bateman of the University of Minnesota football team changed his uniform number to 0 this year as a symbol to indicate there is zero tolerance for racism in Minnesota's culture, and it is a call to action to end racism in our society. The Raider football team decided to participate, and they are supporting the Zero initiative by wearing the Zero stickers on the back of their helmets and committing themselves to tolerate zero racism on their team and in their community. So then Joel Olson, our activities director, tweets this photo and this little statement, which then gets picked up and amplified by none other than number 0 himself, Rashad Bateman, all-star receiver for the Golden Gophers. And that caught the attention of Fox 9 News, who was here today to do a little story on the Raider football team and their commitment to ending racism in our community. So we thank Coach Sullivan and the football team. We have talked about our anti-racism framework, and we've talked about how symbolism and individual behavior are important. And I think that by participating in this Wear the Zero program, we're doing both, right? Wearing the zero on the back of the helmet is a symbolism that we are committed to anti-racism, and then it also is a gateway to talk about our own individual behaviors. And so I'm really proud of how our district's anti-racism framework is now starting, the flywheel that we talk about is starting to spin, where people are picking up on those goals and they are taking them and they're implementing them in their own spaces without having to be directed to do so. So really proud of our Raider football team, and then happy that they got a little bit of press with it today. Also want to encourage you to take a look at the activities calendar for this Saturday, Halloween night. We have a very special presentation by our Northfield High School Drama Department. We all know and adore Bob Gregory Bjorklund, our longtime theater director. And when the pandemic hit, he made an interesting choice because he wanted to make sure that there was some kind of theatrical performance for the fall, but he also knew how things were not predictable, so he selected, very appropriately, the War of the Worlds radio program. And so the high school fall play will be the War of the Worlds. It's simply a radio show that we're going to do on the football field, and so that way we can have people in the stands. And so please check the activities calendar for times. But again, so thankful for Bob and thinking ahead about what kind of flexible show could we do that regardless of the public health circumstances that we would be able to do. They've done a lot of their practicing via Zoom, and so we're very excited to see that unique production only as our theater department can do. So those are the announcements for this evening.
Okay, thank you. Excellent. Board members have anything to add? Amy?
I just want to ask Dr. Hillman if you'll send out the information to all of us about the War of the Worlds presentation.
I absolutely can, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So we'll move on now for discussion and reports. Our first item is the summary of the public hearing that just took place regarding the 2020-2021 World's Best Workforce Plan. And returning to do that, Director of Instructional Services, Hope Langston. So this is an opportunity, board members, for us to ask questions, make comments on Hope's presentation. Amy.
First, thank you, Hope. I love your enthusiasm and your knowledge, and you are a very positive person when you present these things, and I really appreciate that. I am wondering if you would speak a little bit more on how the Portage students do or do not fit into how we can take these various measurements going forward. You touched on it some, but like, will they be able to take the ACT? Will they, how do you see the Portage students in relationship to the World's Best Workforce Plan?
So we know that they weren't part of that math testing. They will be required to be part of MCA testing. Should that take place, they would be considered just like students in our district. So that part would be done. ACT testing, yes, we will offer it to them. They had the option to participate in PSAT testing like 2 weeks ago. So that again will be up to the individual family to decide if that's something they want to participate in. But we do anticipate having our Portage kids be part of required state testing.
Other questions, comments? Ellen?
Great report, and I was so excited to see the kindergarten results. It's a really nice thing to see, and continue to watch that trend. And again, wonderful work on the data summit with the students. They were so enthusiastic last year about it, And I know it was a huge lift, so thank you for all that you did with that. My questions are sort of centered on the career and college ready piece. And I know Amy had asked about this back when we had the high school improvement plan. And this came up again, the idea of career ready versus college ready came up during the Northfield Promise Council of Champions meeting. So I wanted to follow up because it looks like a lot of the actions that we have are more focused on the 2-year and 4-year, which is great. But I'm just wondering about the career readiness piece. And this question came from a community member. And I know we had really engaged a lot of the businesses early when we were looking at some of this. And, you know, we've had that career fair. But I'm just wondering, when you look at the data, it looks like there's going to be students that are going to need remediation and have to potentially pay for that if they were to go on. So I'm just wondering if there are things that, actions that we can take that are more focused on the career readiness piece and not just the college readiness. And I know that part of this, the world's best workforce is defined by what MDE wants, but this is sort of more open and probably broader than the world's best workforce, but I just wondered if you could address that a little bit.
I think that's a great question. And I think the visibility of that career fair that happens in the spring, that brings kids to the middle school and brings high school over to the middle school, is that first foray into like choice for kids in our middle school. And so I think the process kind of begins there. And as they move through the high school, we know, again, this is something we've looked at, we've studied, and we know that kids who were taking like CTE classes at the middle school do not often continue those courses in the high school simply because they can't fit them in their schedule, right? They're having to make choices, and that's one of the things about Northfield is we offer a lot of choices, but what that means is, you know, kids may not be able to proceed down a path at the high school that they maybe were in at the middle school. So I think that in terms of the testing metrics, which is really what we're talking about here, giving that choice to kids is the first step. Now, when you looked at the results for this year for the AccuPlacer, which is really the first time we've ever done this, those numbers did not look great, but those kids will continue to retake that AccuPlacer, and I expect that their scores will improve, just like kids who take the ACT multiple times often see a score increase. So what was really special about that day for those 32 kids that took the AccuPlacer was as they came out, they sat with someone in the torch department who knew about AccuPlacer scores and actually sat one-on-one and discussed, hey, what do you want to do when you graduate? Here's the score you got, because they get their score instantly. Here's what that can mean. Here's maybe what you want to do if that score wasn't where it needed to be. And I think that was an amazing thing to watch. And so the numbers don't necessarily tell that story, but I think it's a shift for us. It was a shift for us to even offer that, choice. And I think we are only going to get better about kids not only seeing that they have a choice, but also the community accepting that there is another pathway besides a 4-year traditional college degree. So I think we have work to do on that, but I think we have taken those beginning steps, and I think we just need to continue on.
Yes, go ahead.
So that's great, and that discussion sounds, how meaningful that had to have been. I'm wondering about the timing, so could they have that discussion and then if they'd already registered, make some different choices? I wasn't sure how the testing date fit with the high school registration.
So their registration for courses?
Right, so you said that, that one of the discussions was, okay, this is what you want to do, here's what you might want to think about.
That happened our testing date last year was at the end of February, so it was prior to the fall registration period. This year it's March 2nd, so I know that's going to be super tight, but I think that kids, can still make changes within a certain window, so I'm hopeful that those conversations guide some of that course selection. It also worked in the opposite way, Ellen, where a student came out of there with an actually pretty high math score and had no idea that could think about a four-year college, so it kind of worked in both directions. But the timing is tight, but we sign up for that early spring for that very reason. And so it should work out okay in terms of letting those tests inform what they take the following year.
Great, thank you.
Great question. Tom?
Following on that, so you're going to have ACT test prep potentially during like the flex hour or something. Is there AccuPlacer test prep possible?
So the AccuPlacer, there's not like a course, that they offer, but the Torch folks do help kids get ready for that, most explicitly in math. But there's not the typical coursework that you would see for ACT prep.
Right. And then, so 32 kids took the AccuPlacer. How many took roughly like ACT and the military, and do some just not take any test?
So there were some that did not take any, and those generally are some special education students with more significant needs, where it's just not appropriate for them to take the ACT. We had 10 kids take the ASVAB, and I think we had 5 kids who didn't take any test last year. And again, those were on a case-by-case, specific to the parent and student desire for the appropriate test for that student. So I'm expecting, we really were anticipating this year that we'd continue to see some movement towards capitalizing on that choice. And it was a little over 300 kids who ended up taking the ACT. But again, ACT was the default, right? So if they didn't send back that card with a choice, then they took the ACT.
Do other schools have comparable percentages?
I'm not sure. I don't know of any other schools actually officially offering a choice like that. That would be, I'd actually be happy to follow up on that for you, Tom, to see if I can find any other districts who have done this in a formal way like we have. But so I don't have an answer for you tonight, but I'm happy to look into that.
Okay, thank you.
Julie, can I follow on?
Yes.
Tom, that decision to offer that choice, and this really actually goes to what Ellen's question was too. When we started to go, if you remember, the state paid for every student to take the ACT several years ago. And then when the state stopped paying for it, we continued to pay for it as a district because we looked at it as a metric that we thought was important, in the school system. And as we were reviewing several years ago our approach to career and college readiness, as we've said all along, one size doesn't fit all. And so I very clearly remember us in the district office conference room looking at how it was part of the achievement and integration goal setting process, along with this career and college readiness discussion that led to the choice. And so I agree, I don't know of anybody who offers any kind of choice, because the AccuPlacer, you get this instant result. You basically take it if you're going to go to a community or technical college, and they have you take it right there and then. But we know that is the gateway, for a number of those, for those community and technical colleges. So I do believe we're one of the few, if not the only one, who is offering this universal testing day choice. Do other people take AccuPlacer? Absolutely, but they're doing it at the technical college when they go to register. Are there other kids that take the ASVAB? Of course there are, but I don't know of anybody who's packaged it together that you pick one of the three and everybody take it on the same day. And it does go to the point of that recognizing that the ACT isn't for everyone, and that if you take the ACT and that is not what your long-term goal is, now you have taken something that you may not be as successful on as if you were to take a different assessment that better aligned with your post-high school plans. So I think we might be able to say we're innovative on this even, right, Hope?
Yeah, think of that. And just to clarify, the state paid for FRP students to take the ACT, but that's it. So I think we only got 1 year where they actually paid for everybody, and then that was quickly done. So it is a significant cost to the district, and it's worth it. We agree that it is important, but we also agree that families and students need a choice about what they want to do for their post-secondary path.
Excellent. Rob?
So you always have lots of information, lots of acronyms, and I appreciate getting the explanation of those. I feel like there was something new that I noticed this time, which was the Haggerty curriculum. And I was wondering if you could, this may be review, just explain where this is being implemented, what it does, and how we might see the results of that.
So Haggerty, actually, there was a guy, Michael Haggerty, he has since passed away, but he's the one who developed this curriculum in foundational skills. And we know that we have learned a lot about how kids learn to read, and neuroscience and cognitive science has informed us, right, about how the brain learns to read. And we know that there's some skills kids need to have in place and securely in place if they are going to become proficient readers. And those are those phonemic awareness skills, like rhyming, blending, segmenting, syllabication. And the Haggerty curriculum is written over a 35-week period with very explicit building of skills in all of those 8 phonemic awareness areas. And kids who have this curriculum go on to become proficient readers at a higher rate than kids who do not. So for instance, St. Dominic's, in their partnership with Groves Academy, is using Haggerty as well. And I found out about it actually through ADSIS training and MDE's very strong belief in the program. Knew that we had interest in it, so for Move 5 last year, the kindergarten team at Bridgewater wanted to implement Haggerty, applied for Move 5 funding, got it, and the pandemic hit. But the more I learned about it this summer, the more it became clear, like, wow, for a minimal effort in terms of time and teacher training, this is something that could pack a powerful punch for our kids. So we have funding available through an MDE grant called the Tier 1 Fidelity Grant, and we use that funding to purchase the product. Talked to teams of teachers this summer about implementing it. So all of kindergarten and all of grade 1 are using the program right now. Where I think we're going to see that play out is, historically from our data that our kids come in ready for K at a certain level, but maybe don't always maintain that growth by the end of kindergarten. And we know there's some skills that need to be explicitly taught, and we believe that this is the vehicle, the Haggerty curriculum, the vehicle that's going to allow us to do that.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments? I have a couple of questions. Oh, I'm sorry, Tom, go ahead.
On the racial divide in the attendance, you talked about like looking at it from a family unit. Are there other things that stand out that are causing low attendance?
Well, we do know that, I guess if we're talking about a pandemic year or a non-pandemic year, transportation can sometimes be a barrier. If a student needs to stay home and care for younger siblings, that can be a barrier. There's kids, I'm just talking anecdotally what I've heard, kids who maybe are choosing to work certain days rather than come to school. So there's kind of a host of things that are part of a family unit that we can look at and help a family think about other ways to make sure that their kids are attending school.
Oh, I'm sorry, Tom, did you have another question? Other questions or comments? I had a couple questions. So the Haggerty curriculum it's really interesting. Is that work well with CCC? It's augmenting it, but are teachers finding that, that it's maybe throwing off the scope and sequence of CCC, or it obviously seems like it's blending well with that curriculum?
CCC actually is a proponent of Hagerty,
Oh,
and
great.
so when, you know, we've had a couple meetings with CCC just about how to proceed with this pandemic year, and responding to school closure last year. They are totally on board with Hagerty. With any new thing that we add, you know, we have a mixed response, right? So we are just working to celebrate some of the wins that people are seeing with the program and amplify those stories to kind of get other folks on board. But it really is easy to deliver this curriculum, and so we're sort of banking on that and the fact that it can be done virtually or in person. It's a routine that once the kids learn, it becomes pretty regular. The 8 lessons don't have to be all done at one time, so we are, you know, coaching people like, hey, you could do one of these while you're waiting in line at the cafeteria, and you could do another one while you're waiting in line at gym. And so they're really, you know, 8 very short exercises that you do with the students, and we're just helping teachers see how they can fit that in.
Oh, that's excellent. And you indicated kindergarten grade 1. Is that the only grades that are available, or is there?
There's actually,
Beyond.
it starts pre-K.
Okay.
So we have two pre-K classrooms, just delivered the materials to them. There's a backlog in the cards for Hagerty because I think it's getting a lot of demand. And so I just delivered those last week. So 2 pre-Ks, all of K, all of 1. Second grade can use it, but it's the same program as in first grade. It's a 1-2 combo. It's called primary. So we opted to just do first grade. And first grade really, the team that came together and worked on Critical Core this summer, they were all in and took it back to their first grade peers, and that was like the first grade to say, the first grade level to say, we are doing this. So, so really it's K and 1, I would say, Eric.
Okay, excellent. So then, to Ellen's point, just the huge wins with kindergarten and those metrics, and you know, so kudos go to you and of course Erin for the incredible work that you have done with the preschools. I was wondering, is the Mother Goose curriculum still an option for our in-home daycare
Yes, it
providers?
is. Erin, do
Okay.
you want to weigh in on that?
Sure. We are still using some Mother Goose Time curriculum for in-home daycare, so we've also pushed out some other options. We're not using it quite at the same level we did in the last 2 years. Partly we don't have the same access to the Mother Goose curricular time as we did in those 2 years that we had the grant. So we, in some areas, put together packets that we have leftover packets that we had that we could still put together. And then in other areas, we have continued to work with our in-home childcare providers to kind of see what worked well for them out of that and how we can continue that in other ways too.
Excellent, excellent. So then my question about kindergarten, we were doing the SABRS test. Is that not being
Yes,
done?
that window's open right now.
Okay.
Something that's super exciting about the Sabres, again, that is meant to be delivered in an in-person classroom setting. So the Portage kids will not be evaluated using Sabres. It's normed for in-school settings. And so that window's open right now, but one of the big steps forward with that test is we used to do it on Google Forms, and it was some messy data cleanup. And again, the brilliance of Chris Nessett, she figured out how we could put it in Skyward. And so teachers are actually completing it in Skyward. So that record now travels with the student, so we'll be able to really look at some trends and track a student's, you know, progress over time with that social emotional metric. Before it was all just living in Google Sheets, and I could put it together in a Tableau dashboard, but it's nice that, you know, by the time a kid gets to middle school, you actually have a social emotional history in the Skyward record. So that was, I think, a big leap forward. We were all ready to launch that last spring, and then the pandemic hit, but they're doing it right now, and they're doing it in Skyward, and we think that's going to be a good win for the district. So.
Excellent. And then you and I briefly talked at the short break we had about the standardized tests for the state. So I thought it was interesting, if you were talking about the timeline and the decision-making process and how many challenges that there may be and when we may know as a district what type of assessments will be done this year.
Yeah, typically, believe it or not, the process that, the procedures manuals generally published in October, November, it's already published for this year. And then the process itself starts in December with some special education coding that gets done, and it's pretty labor intensive for our special ed teachers, and I am really hoping they will make a decision before we ask teachers to engage in that process. But we have to move forward as if it's going to happen until they tell us it doesn't. And right now, there is no federal waiver for this year in place, and that's why that's where we're in the situation we were last spring, because there was a federal waiver for all states. There have been a couple states have requested the waiver this year, but it has not been granted, and so it's a waiting game at this point.
Yeah, and we just talked about just statewide, we know how many districts are in different learning models, and two of our largest districts continue to be in the state or continue to be distance learning, and you were talking about assessments and having parents have to be there, and it just seems like an incredibly challenging feat to try to do that. So I guess you just have to wait and see how it plays out, but it seems very problematic.
And really not valid when you have people in all different learning models.
Okay.
So.
Well, I think those are my questions, but I think one thing that I was so anxious for you to be here in person is, of course, for us to thank you for your incredible work. And we all know this is the first year you have done this report solo with the retirement of Mary Grace Hansen, who is our Director of Teaching and Learning, and now your new position as the Director of Instructional Services, and just doing a phenomenal job. And you think about walking into this role and the realignment of how we were providing the support at at each of the buildings, and to have all of the new positions, your new positions, and then being in the midst of distance learning and then not knowing how this year was going to happen. You've just done such a phenomenal job, and we didn't even mention then you were added Portage on top of it, which was really creating an entire new platform of delivering instructions to 640, the new running total,
Yeah.
640 students. So I hope we just owe you a huge debt of gratitude. And to Amy's point, you do it with such positivity and the can-do attitude. And there has to be times that, there are probably times you just cried, but you just kept moving forward, and we just so appreciate your work. And so thank you for this amazing report, but for all of the work that we know has gone into this report, into the results that we see in this report, and your recognition of the challenges, but your positivity in saying we can do this. So thank you.
Thanks, and I couldn't do it without the team, and Dr. Hillman, so thanks to him, and we have a great team that's been able to pivot and fill some needs, so I feel like I'm the lucky one. So.
We are very lucky that you have chosen to work in the Northfield School District, so thank you very much.
All right, thanks.
Okay, so we will move on now to our next item for discussion, which is the Policy Committee recommendations. As a reminder to board members, those policy recommendations were in the table file. So if you want to access your table file to review those. So again, this is, Dr. Hillman can explain, but as you know, this is just the first reading, so we have an opportunity to talk through the policies, and then we would not make any formal action on these policies until our next board meeting. So Dr. Hillman.
Nothing like talking policy after Hope Langston gives a presentation. If that's not totally unfair, I don't know what is. But so we actually have 3 policies that we're bringing to you for the 2-step consideration process. The first one, 419, is really some updates, statutory updates to our tobacco-free environment policy. Last spring, one of the things that the legislature did get done was some vaping awareness and prevention requirements. Fortunately, the school district has been doing some vaping prevention instruction in our middle school health and our high school health programs for some time, so we're already in compliance, but the policy does talk about making sure that vaping, anti-vaping instruction, let's be really clear, we're not teaching people, anti-vaping instruction will happen at least once in the middle school, once in the high school. And then in addition, you're going to see that anytime we update the tobacco policy, there's a number of definition changes, and part of that is because of the way that products develop and markets evolve. So you'll see that there's a number of different parts around definition of things. So that is really what the base changes to 419 are. This is the MSBA model policy recommendations. So you will see that is basically that on 419. When we go to 516, this is around student medication. And in student medication, it's one of the few policies that we bring to you a short policy and then also ask you to act upon procedures. As you know, most of the time procedures that accompany policy are things that you empower the administration to develop. This is one that we ask you to approve both. When you take a look at the changes in the procedure, it really has some specific things. We have made some minor modifications to the model policy around making sure that, for example, in D, we really highlight middle high school and area learning centers as opposed to secondary school. People don't always know what the word secondary school means, so we're trying to make sure that we separate those pieces out. Then you're going to see that in letter H, this really appears to be the fact of wanting to have it more than one person with the form that is giving permission to students to take medication. So basically what the new approach is to make sure that at least more than one other person, the principal and or the designee, have access to the form. So again, that's something that had come from a legislative change. You will also see some pieces around what can be brought and who has to bring it. That's a new section, section N, really surrounding controlled substances. And then how do we get rid of something? How do we get rid of medication when people have left it behind? Sometimes people move and they leave their medication with us. And so this part of the procedure now defines how do we get rid of any medications. And if it's a controlled substance, we work with the police force to be able to take that off site for us and take it to the box. So that just describes that particular area there. There's also, in our policy committee, we actually had a question. There's a section that is not underlined that actually had to do with times when this policy does not apply. And so we reached out to MSBA to ask them, what do they mean by this? And they said, well, these are the things that are listed in statute of when it doesn't apply, so we put it into the policy as optional. One of which is before and after school activities. So we're going to continue to take a look at that between now and the next time. Is it even necessary? Do we want to make sure that we are keeping medications that people have to take it for if they need something for before or after school activities? As a policy committee, we tried to brainstorm, what would they be talking about there? But the School Boards Association said it was just something that had been listed. There was a list of exceptions to the required policy that was in statute, and that they just included it because they wanted to make sure they complied with what the statute had said. So we may have to leave it in. We may be able to take it out. We just learned that today, so we're going to take some additional look at that. So that is that particular policy, or the policy and procedure surrounding student medication. Policy 607 has some modest changes to grade level, the organization of grade levels, and it's really surrounding the kinds of documentation that we can require for someone to enter kindergarten. So it just simply goes through and talks about that the district may request documentation that verifies a student falls within the minimum and maximum age requirements for admission to a publicly funded pre-kindergarten, preschool, kindergarten grades 1 through 12. It identifies the records that we can ask for, and then it does also give the out of an affidavit from a parent. So a parent can create an affidavit indicating that the child is of the appropriate age. Also defines what kindergarten and what pre-kindergarten are, and I think these are just, again, some cleanup kinds of things based upon feedback from school districts over the years about making sure that we do have the documentation. You know, we have long had an early entrance approach for people wanting to come to kindergarten early, but we know that there's a lot of pressure on people to get their students into kindergarten, so we can request, are they actually old enough? And if they're not, we can certainly have them go through the early entrance procedures. But this just provides the district an opportunity to be able to request those records. So those are the 3 policies. Again, this is first reading. We'll bring them back to you the next time and ask for formal approval then.
Rob?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch this at the policy committee, but I have a question about policy 516.
Yep, student medication.
Actually, the procedures.
Yep.
Section M says procedures for administration of drugs and medicine at school and school activities shall be developed in consultation with the school nurse, blah, blah, blah. The school district administration shall submit these procedures and any additional guidelines to the school board for approval. Is that this list of procedures?
Yes.
So the procedures include approving the procedures.
That is apparently correct.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Other
I love
questions or comments? Amy?
So I have a couple questions or comments on each one. So looking at policy 419, if I read this right, so this is just clarifying it, no one is allowed to use tobacco products on school grounds, but staff and personnel can possess products. Is that right?
Can you show me which section are you looking at?
I'm looking at where the well, it's kind of in general. So 2A talks about no one being able to smoke or uses tobacco. And then 2B talks about violation of this policy occurs when any elementary school, middle school, or secondary school student possesses any type of tobacco-related devices. So that is just the students, right? So you could have a staff member with cigarettes in his or her pocket walking around. I mean, I'm just wondering how that works. And I'm okay with it. I just want to make sure I understand.
Yeah, so I believe that the possession, as I reflect on this, it is not legal for someone under the age of 18 to possess.
Mm-hmm.
It is legal for someone above the age of 18 to possess. Now, if we had an employee walking around with a pack of cigarettes in their pocket, we would talk with them about that that's not an appropriate piece. But it's not necessarily against the policy to possess. So the example I see would be if a person who did choose to smoke left those cigarettes in their car, right? That wouldn't be a violation of the policy, but it would be, right, for a student. So I think it's delineating between the ability to possess, which is someone 18 or older, well now 21 or older actually in Northfield, right, because of tobacco 21, versus someone who's not. And so again, professional standards we would not accept someone walking around with something that was clearly tobacco related, but it wouldn't be against the policy for them to have something in their car or I suppose in a purse or in another place where...
Out of sight.
Right.
Okay. That's what I thought, but I was just making sure. And then just a comment for, again, policy 419. This is 2D, and it talks about will not solicit or accept any contributions or gifts of money, etc. And it seems like this is also connected to 809.1. And I don't know if we need to, go back and double check to make sure we've stated the same thing in 809.1, or whether we need to refer them to 809.1 or make that connection really visible.
So 809.1, if you remember, has a section that we will only enter into agreements that, I'm trying to remember the language, that talks about that aligns with the school district vision and ideals and things like that. And clearly, this would be we would not be allowed to do that because we have this particular policy as well. So I think that my sense would be, I'm not sure that you need to have anything else because 809.1 talks about that we would only enter into agreements. Julie might have it right in front of her. Thank you for the language, yes. So that sponsorship shall not be granted to businesses, foundations, or corporate whose products or practices run counter to the district vision, mission, or policies of the school district. So taken care of.
Great. Then my questions on policy 516. I was just wondering if the school nurses had reviewed this at all, or especially the procedures, and if it makes sense with what they're actually doing.
Yes, Anita, I think have they seen this yet? Okay. That will be part of our process here. Again, they are already operating under this policy because this is not a new policy. There are simply some changes around how we get rid of stuff. So we will certainly talk with them about making sure that they have any concerns about. However, I also want to point out that these are, MSBA policy revisions that are based in statute. So it may not matter what we've done in the past, right? Because we have to, and frankly, I think that we have already been doing the take it to the box. We've been doing that already. And I know that we have had Bart, the school resource officer, help us with some of those things. So, but we will certainly make sure that they see the revisions between now and the next time we have you look at it.
And also, the way I'm reading this is that even the secondary students can't bring any over-the-counter medications to school. Is that right?
I'm not sure that, let's see, which section are you referring to?
I'm looking at policies D right now.
Oh, letter D. Okay, thank
Letter
you.
D. Oh yeah, procedures, letter
No,
D.
students may bring, if you look at D, it says, middle school, high school, and area learning center students or their parent or guardian shall bring the medication to the nurse's office.
So all medication has to be at the nurse's office?
Correct.
Even over the counter?
You bet.
I'm curious as to how many students actually do that with certain over-the-counter ones, but.
Well, and that may very well be the case, but we've had long-standing practice that, you're to bring in fact, you're supposed to have permission to have, certain over-counter medication like Tylenol and things like that. So it's a matter of making sure that it's all, you're right, just like any other policy or any rule that we have in any organization, there are people who may not follow it, and if they were to not follow it, we would certainly correct them and have them bring it to the nurse's office.
In that case, does it make a difference if they're 18 or not?
No, because they are a student at school. And it's taught, this procedure would say that the permission would make a difference, right? They could give themselves permission, but the policy would still say, the procedures, would say they shall still bring that medication to the nurse's office.
Okay. Then my last question is on policy 607. And I'm looking at the definitions and the definition of pre-kindergarten. And I just, as being a program designed for students younger than 5 years of age on September 1st. And I know there are people who might have a very young student, say who was born at the end of August, who don't want to start their kid into kindergarten as a new 5-year-old. Would they be ineligible then to stay in like a Ready for K or a pre-kindergarten program?
Yeah, so they would not be ineligible, but I'm gonna check into that because there are two terms in here. There's terms of preschool and pre-K. And so we will check on that definition because I agree with you. There are people who will they'll hold their student back, and in this particular case, or they'll delay their students entering the kindergarten is what I should really say. We'll check into that and find out if we certainly would not want to invalidate those students' opportunity to do that.
Right, or keep them from being able to attend school for a year. They might have been in ECFE all that time and then all of a sudden can't go. All right.
Well, and to be clear too, in this particular case, it is not, that is simply a definition, right? And if you really think about the rest of this, if you think about C, for example, it is simply talking about the minimum and maximum age requirements. And you'll see that there's publicly funded pre-kindergarten and preschool. So we'll check on that. I think this is a difference about who may qualify for state funds for the publicly funded pre-kindergarten.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Keep checking into that. This is great.
I can just.
Go ahead, Erin.
So just, if children are age eligible to enroll in kindergarten, they are not eligible for pathway funding. If that helps just clear a little of that up too.
So I think that's what that was really what I was just saying, that you could be, if you were 5 on August 30th and parent wants to delay your entry for another year, you wouldn't be eligible for another scholarship.
But would you still
Correct.
be eligible to enroll?
Yes.
You would be eligible to enroll, Amy, and at times we have put students who would benefit from another year of pre-K. We have school readiness dollars we can put them on. They're just not eligible for the state-sponsored pathway funding dollars if they're actually age eligible to enroll in kindergarten.
So I think that might need to be clarified a little bit with that 3B definition.
Okay, we'll take a look at that.
And those are my questions. Thank you.
Rob, you have a question or comment?
I just had I have the statute open that has these definitions, and both the kindergarten and the pre-kindergarten definition are from that language is in the statute. So I think, if we wanted to add something about eligibility for enrollment, that would be in addition to the statutory language. But
Yeah, and then it goes back to that this particular policy is simply defining the organization of grade levels, not necessarily eligibility, right? So we will still look in and just ask a couple of questions about it. But I agree, we want to be careful if they've taken the definition directly from the statute.
Great.
Good questions.
Great questions, Amy. Thank you. And you came up with them so quickly. This
I
was
did that
amazing.
10 minutes between meetings.
That's awesome. Thank you. Other questions, comments board members have? Okay, great. Well, thank you. So again, as this was part of table files, so we realize that not everyone maybe have had a chance to thoroughly read through this, and with the intention of approving these policies at our next board meeting, if you have a chance to review these in the coming 2 weeks and have any questions or comments for Dr. Hillman or Anita at that time, you could get to them so we can have final copies ready for.
And
for
just
the
to be
vote.
clear, the reason they were in the table file is because our policy committee met on Thursday afternoon and we couldn't get it into the
Oh,
regular.
that's totally understandable, especially in light of the policy committee continuing to do this great work and despite everything going on. So thank you. We will move on now to a financial update. Director of Finance Val Murdesdorf. Welcome, Val.
Thank you. Good evening. So just a couple quick items to update. We did submit our application for the federal CARES funding. So that, as a reminder, is 3 different calculations and allocations that we received. And we did apply for about $267,000 of the largest portion of that to go to cover the cost of the emergency childcare from last spring. So we did find out early last week, I think, that they had approved our application. So we will work through that. So that's been included in the audit. Speaking of audits, they were on site last week for one day. They've been doing quite a bit remotely, as you could imagine. But they were on site one day last week to go through some of the paper-intensive type things that are a little easier to do in person. And so far, all of that is looking well. Because it is pushed back a little bit this year, we are anticipating that they will be presenting at the December meeting instead of the last meeting in November, so that's just a heads up for you on that. And we did submit an application for a small amount of the CARES funding through Goodhue County. They have an application process open, so we submitted that today. So we'll see if we have a really small number of students from Goodhue County, so I'm not sure if they did ask how many students on that application, so they might prioritize funding for districts that are more solidly serving Goodhue County, but we did apply for it. And then we did update our ADM calculation and estimates on the MDE website to make sure that they had our most up-to-date numbers to document that decline from what we had projected. And that is a big thing that they were pushing and asking for, because they will lock down that system and use those numbers for their next financial forecast. But it also will recalculate our aides when they do that in their process to make sure that we're not getting overpaid for anything, because we certainly don't want to be in a situation where we have to pay back funds based on that calculation. So those are kind of the big ones that we've got going on right now. But I would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Questions, comments, board members have? I had Dr. Hillman, I saw that the Star Tribune had done a story about parents choosing just to delay the start of kindergarten for their students, and that made a ton of sense. And Dr. Hillman indicated possibly half of our projected shortfall is parents choosing to delay kindergarten, and clearly that's something you could have foreseen at the time when you were doing projections. So.
Yeah, it was kind of a double whammy, because this was the year where we had a really small birth number 5 years ago, so we were already projecting a smaller kindergarten class. But when I did the detailed analysis, it was about 34 kids that were not in kindergarten that we were expecting. So.
Yeah, that's a big number. Tom?
So does that mean next year we're going to be on the high side for kindergarten?
I would say that depends a lot on what the pandemic is doing, but I mean, obviously that would be our hope, is that they would just come to us a year later. But certainly we will keep an eye on that and hope for the best.
And will we be, are they spread out around the district? Will we have problems? It's too early to tell.
Well, go ahead,
sorry.
Val. Go ahead, Val.
Oh, I was just gonna say, we obviously don't know because they withheld their students. I don't do my enrollment estimate by building. I do it district-wide, so I'm not sure if there was one building that was really short in kindergarten. Matt might have some more thoughts on that, but hopefully it's spread out. I would say typically with that large of a number, it would be unlikely for it to be fairly concentrated, but there's a first time for everything.
Yeah, so just some anecdotal thoughts. Number one, Sibley for years has been a solid 4-section kindergarten building, and we're at 3 sections this year there. So, well, we do have a tool, Guide K-12, that we just actually haven't used yet. And we'll need to find out who these students are and then code them appropriately. But we can actually take a look at grade levels by neighborhood. Now, it's not foolproof, right? Because we don't know in that mix who's going to choose to go to St. Dominic, who's going to choose Prairie Creek, but it may be able to give us a better sense of what we're looking at for next year. Now, the good news is, that because of the construction projects that we've had at the elementary schools, we do have some flexibility, at our buildings, even at Bridgewater, where they maintained a 4-section class, but you may remember they also cycled out a 5-section 5th grade last year. So there's even some flexibility at Bridgewater. And of course at Greenville Park, we built those to have a 5th section as part of those wings. So we think we're in good shape for space, even with a larger kindergarten class potentially coming next year.
Other questions or comments? So I have a question, how the auditors are working virtually. Are you, that seems like a challenge.
It's easier than you would think. So they have actually been, positively for them, they've actually been rolling this out for probably the last 3 years. So part of I would say that auditing in general has a pretty high staff turnover because it's, you're driving constantly and away from home, and so there's a pretty high turnover rate. And so they've been working, I would say, industry-wide to find ways to keep people at home more. And so this is one avenue that they've been rolling out the last 3 years. So they have an online portal that we have access to. And they basically structure all of our audit requests. So there are things that I do every single year. The same work paper, updating the numbers, making sure everything ties out. And so there's lots of things that I'm just rolling forward and fixing up and making sure they tie out, and then I can just upload that document. Our finance software is actually a remote desktop that they have access to through Region 5, which is super helpful. That makes it significantly easier because they can just log in and run a report versus having me send every single report or data that they're looking for. So they actually download our trial balance, load it in their system, and so those pieces go really smoothly. The parts that are pretty labor intensive paper-wise are the single audit, which is the audit of our federal programs. So this year they test our child nutrition program, and they actually tested the ESSER funding for the emergency child care because that was a pretty significant dollar amount, and they had tested special ed the year before, and so they try to kind of rotate the programs that they're testing. And so that's been an interesting process just because the official guidance on what they're supposed to test isn't even out yet. So they've kind of worked through, it was all payroll that we coded, obviously, so they just selected a sample and we provided the documentation for that and the application and the approval and those sorts of things. We didn't even receive a formal approval email or letter from MDE. Like I just had to screenshot the serves window to show that the application shows funded and active. So we're kind of making things work as we go, but they do have a pretty easy to use portal, and they just put documents out there and different requests, and it has due dates and all that stuff. So it works pretty slick, but there are just a few things that are, for instance, child nutrition, part of the testing is the free and reduced applications, and they have to test 40 of them and see any supporting documentation, so we would have to scan all of that in, fill out the worksheet, and so some of those pieces are just easier in person. So, does that answer your question?
Yes, that's really interesting to hear the process. Thank you. Any other questions, comments for Val? Thanks for all your great work, Val, as always. Next, our operation update. There was some information in our packet, but just a reminder, the table file was the pulse survey of parents and employees. So, Dr. Hillman.
Yes, so for Superintendent's Operation Update number 10, we like to number things now, and we've been doing this for a while. So the first thing I want to share with you this evening is just talking about that monthly anti-racism discussion that our staff are having. Hope Langston referred to it during her presentation earlier. But as Hope said, on the third Wednesday of each month, we're using that professional learning community time to have this district-wide focus on anti-racism and racial equity. And we're using the time to discuss those issues. Every session so far, the two we've had, we have started with a district-wide webinar where I show the graphic that I put into your packet about our anti-racism framework. I talk about anything that we've done in the last month to address any one of those areas. And then we have an activity, and then we have a debrief time. And we're really modeling this. Several of our administrators have participated in the Courageous Leadership Institute through Minnesota State University Mankato. I'm part of the Superintendent's Racial Equity Leadership Network, which follows a very similar program. And so we're using a strategy that we've learned as part of that by having some kind of activity and then the time for intentional and directed discussion. So the first month we watched the second episode of Emmanuel Ochoa's Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. If you've not seen this series, I encourage you to watch it. Emmanuel is a former NFL player, and he really is able to make these very difficult discussions about race accessible for lots of different folks. And so we used the second episode of that in September, again with some follow-up questions for discussion. And in October, staff read or they could listen to an essay that was published in the New York Times on the day of Representative John Lewis's funeral. Representative Lewis wrote this essay that he asked to be published on the day of his funeral. It's very powerful. If you have not read it, I would encourage you to do so. And then, again, a series of questions at the end. And at the last question is, we ask each person to make a powerful action commitment based upon what they learned in that session. So we'll continue this monthly throughout the entire year. This is really to get people more and more comfortable about discussing issues of race with their colleagues and using an anti-racist lens to approaching their work here in Northfield Public Schools. I'm going to come back. Well, we'll go ahead. If you look in your table file, I did include the initial review of the 30-day pulse survey. And so it was in your table file today. And we administered the 30-day pulse survey. So talking with our friends at Studer Education, we're replacing our annual surveys with a 30 and a 90-day pulse survey, because as we talk to our friends from Studer Education, because that this year is so different than anything else, looking at something that's more specific to what we're working through and having something that we can react to more quickly than our typical survey, employee engagement, parent satisfaction, district services action plans. They have suggested this. We had the choice. We took their recommendation to do these pulse surveys. We had 1,167 parent submissions, which is in line. We're pleased with that end, and 379 employee submissions. We have read all of the comments have been read. We're still analyzing the comments for themes in each of the surveys. So when you take a look at the parent and guardian survey results, there are some pretty big wins here. And in fact, talking with KK Owen, who is our Studer Education coach, she told us that undoubtedly we're in the top tier in the country of the 100 and some, however many other partners they have as part of Studer Education. All the schools who are participating gave the same questions. But when you look at number one, we need to be incredibly proud of this. I am confident that my child's school is handling the COVID-19 challenge to keep my child safe. 4.21 on a 5-point scale. And when you combine the agree and strongly agree categories, 85% of parent submissions selected either agree or strongly agree with that statement. I think that's a testament to our staff, to our teachers, to our custodians, to our nurses, to our building principals, and to everyone who worked so hard over the summer to plan for a safe entry into the safe as practical entry to the 2020-21 school year. As you keep looking through, I'm confident that my child's school is focused on the social emotional well-being of the child, even with one of the lower scores at 3.91. 72% of people agreed or strongly agreed with that. I have the resources needed to help my child learn, 3.95, 73%. Here's one that I'm really proud of as well, which is something that we've heard about this a little bit before in some of our other surveys about people wanting more access to their teachers. I have access to my child's teachers when needed, 4.14, 83% of people either agreed or strongly agreed. Receiving feedback, that's another area we continue to work on and making sure that parents know what feedback is. Confident that my child will not fall behind in school. This is something that we're seeing nationally, right? People are very concerned about what this year is going to do for their child. And so we are, one of the ways that we're planning to respond to that is we're going to bring back, both on the employee and the parent side, our webinar series that was so well received last spring. And we're going to dedicate a couple of our webinar series to, let's talk about what does being behind, what do you worry about when you're thinking your child is behind? What are some things We need an unprecedented level of partnership with families. What are the things that you can do at home to work? And we really talk about that, trying to help understand that the entire globe is in this mess, right? And so behind is something that is subjective to a certain extent. Now, the thing that we do know is that, unfortunately, during this time, the opportunity gap is just, we know that that's expanding faster than what we are able to keep up with simply just by the nature of the pandemic. But we're going to focus on talking with families about what are the things they can do to help us so that they make sure that they, and the things that we're already doing. So for example, Hope Langston mentioned before that we are using the SIPS intervention nearly universally, this year. And that's because that does have the opportunity to accelerate reading growth at 1.5 years. So that's a departure from the norm in order to try to make sure that students don't fall behind, if that makes sense. So number one, it's going to be sharing with families some inside baseball about what do we do to keep kids from falling behind, and then what are some things that they can do to help. Again, we seem to be universally applauded on our communication, as you see. I received timely communication on changes that occur at my child's school, a 4.16, with actually 86% of respondents agreeing or strongly agreeing. So while certainly at any time, one of the dangers of the continuous improvement model is that if you're not careful, you can feel like you're never good enough, right? You have to be, but tonight we celebrate these wins. We celebrate the work that our staff have done to earn some really excellent scores, and the fact that our families know that we are prioritizing health and safety and talking to them about what we're doing. So we take a moment and we reframe and we say, yep, these are some great wins. Now what's next, and what are the next things that we can do? Because we know that we're just continually trying to get better. When we look at our staff scores, there's some areas that we need to look at for some improvement there. But at the same time, when you look at these 4 scores, I feel confident our school system is creating a safe work and learning environment. 68% of our staff who took the survey agreed or strongly agreed with that. If you look at, I am aware of what is occurring in our system to meet these challenges. Again, 67% agreed or strongly agreed. Finally, I'm confident that our school system will overcome these challenges. Almost 60% said they agreed or strongly agreed with that. Now, the one that is the lowest is I'm involved in providing input to overcome these challenges. So that's going to be an area that we're going to be looking at, because there are ways for people to be involved. We're just maybe not sure that we have marketed those well enough or really explained to people, here's how your input has been used. Because we know that when we get the data from the people who are closest to the action, that's where some of the best innovations and some of the best strategies can come. So we think there's 2 parts to it. One, over the summer we did have around 100 people, many of whom were paid to come in and to work on some of these committees. But again, that was a smaller set. And then each building does have a COVID-19 team, and most of those buildings are taking feedback. They're providing reports to their staff. So we're going to look at, again, this is where we're going to bring back at least a monthly webinar that Cheryl Hall, our COVID-19 coordinator, and I will run. We'll do Q&A sessions as part of that so that people can ask their questions directly. We'll highlight what are the ways that they can provide input if they think there's a better way to do something, because we're all about process improvement. And so making sure that those channels and protocols are available so that people know how to provide their input, and then defining what input and feedback really is. At your places of work as well, sometimes folks don't think that their feedback was heard if their suggestion wasn't implemented. And so really being clear that there's lots of suggestions that might be very good. We may not be able to do all of them for various reasons. And if we can't, then I think we need to come back and explain, here's a suggestion we heard, we can't do that because of X, Y, and Z. It could be something that's a state rule, it could be a variety of different things of why we might not be able to do something. But I think making sure we follow up, even if a suggestion was not necessarily implemented, talking about that we heard that concern and why it wasn't something that was for consideration. So those are the results of that survey. So far, again, we just got these results last week. Our district administrative team spent 90 minutes with our student education coach, KK Owen, last Wednesday, going through these results in detail. The rollouts will look a little bit different than what you've seen in the past. We won't be doing the large rollouts like we normally do. It'll be It's not going to be partial, it's just going to be a more efficient rollout, and it will most likely not necessarily even be a Zoom or in person. We'll be working through a variety of different strategies to respond to the feedback. But at the end of the day, after 30 days of being here, we asked people for what they thought. We've taken their feedback, and we are taking action steps based upon that feedback. And that is what the continuous improvement cycle is all about. I'm going to go back to the operations update. And I just want to share with you just a very briefly about considering learning model changes. So we have seen the infection rate in Rice County be above 20 infections per 10,000 residents over the past 2 weeks. I think it'll be really, the next couple of days are pretty critical. I will tell you that it will be above 20 again this week because the data cutoff is on Sunday. We had really been progressing really great, and we had seen reductions in the cases significantly, and then we got nailed on Friday and Saturday with pretty substantial numbers. Today we had 2 cases in Rice County. We'll take that, right? But we were back up above 20 cases per day on Friday and Saturday of this week. We're trying to figure out what the pattern, is it a matter of when some testing results come back? So I believe we'll be above 20 for a 3rd week in a row. Now, if today is 2, and if we have some other big numbers that are coming off the 14-day rotation, if those are replaced with smaller numbers, we could be back under 20 actually within just a matter of a few days. We have a 33 coming up that's supposed to come off probably at the end of this week. And if that's replaced with a 3 or a 4, right, that takes that 14-day rolling average down significantly. And what's interesting is remember that grid that I'm referring to was developed back in July and was intended for the opening of the school year. But since we've had kids back in school, in some cases in Minnesota from the middle of August, we have learned that there's a bunch of other data points that actually may be even more relevant than what we started with. And to be clear, not criticizing because it was a scientific-based approach to begin with, and then we've just continued to learn and evolve. So there are some other things that we're looking at. We're looking at exclusion of students because of positive COVID-19 cases or close contacts. And thankfully, we have had very few people, other than the person who has been infected, who have had to be excluded. There have been some others, but it's not been substantial. You'll hear about school districts where there's an entire team, who's out for those kinds of things. And right now, so far, we have, and that can change in an instant, right? But so far, it appears the protocols that we have in place are working well. We are also taking a look at are the cases that we're seeing a result of student-to-student or teacher-to-student transmission. In every contact tracing process we do, we try to determine that. So far, we have no evidence to suggest that the transmissions have taken place at school. And that's actually something you're hearing across the state in many, many different places. When we look at that, is 5% or more of the population of the school out because of influenza or COVID-like illnesses, symptoms. And so, by way of example, we had started looking at this quite some time ago because of some concerns we had at Sibley. But when I gave you the report last week, Sibley's 4-day average had been at 1.96. The middle school has been averaging between 2 and 3% a day. And we're looking to get all of that data rolling for each school because we think that that's an important harbinger of what's happening. We look at the Rice County share, right? So if we look at Northfield has about 1/3 of the population of Rice County. But when we look at the total cases so far, Northfield has had about 20% of the cases from Dundas or Northfield. And it's not just Northfield city proper, that's anybody who has a Northfield or Dundas zip code, right? So it actually does capture some of the people in the townships, compared to Faribault that has had 71% of the cases so far. We're also looking at having multiple data points, and we're in constant contact with Rice County Public Health. We did have an incident command team meeting last Friday. Julie sits on that representing the board. And again, Sarah Coulter and the team at Rice County Public Health said they do not recommend making a learning model change at the elementary as of yet. We're going to keep watching it. We know that the darkest days of the pandemic are ahead of us. The next 12 weeks are really going to be tough, right? Not only here, but across the country. And so we're going to continue to work on making sure that we are following the protocols. Because what we know is that when we're following the protocols, we have the ability to mitigate transmission. And what we know is behind, what the scientists will tell you is behind the current increases is a combination of what is called COVID fatigue, which is now transitioned to COVID anger, which has been coined by a couple of scientists about people just being angry that we're still dealing with this, and then letting down on the protocols. The biggest engine of transmission right now are small family gatherings where people are very comfortable with each other and they're not following the protocols. So we will continue to use our convening power to market that wear your mask, wash your hands, stay 6 feet apart, follow the protocols. No one is perfect, right? There are times that we know that we've not done it correctly either, but these are the key things to keeping us in school. If we can follow the protocols and we can convince our friends and neighbors to do this, we have a very good chance to keep kids in school. If we don't, they're going to be home. And it's going to be a matter of time if we don't keep doubling down on these important things. And then encouraging people to get tested. I think that that's another thing you're going to start hearing about more and more around especially trying to think about how we can efficiently test segments of asymptomatic people, because that's the other part that is driving this right now, are the asymptomatic transmitters. And so thinking about how we're going to have to see how the county public health and how Minnesota rolls that out. But you're going to be, you can read about it. Governor Walz talked about it today. You'll be reading about it. Some very interesting case studies between colleges who've implemented regular testing and those who haven't. I won't go into that tonight because I care about you and the time. So, but that is where we're at with how we're making learning model decisions. There may be other things that force our hand to make a learning model change at one school, maybe not the others. So we'll continue to watch those cases. We'll continue to use as full of a data set as we possibly can have to make the best decisions that we're able to. So that's my report for this evening. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Amy.
Thank you, Dr. Hillman. I have a question about the Pulse survey,
Yes.
and it's about the parent-guardian survey in particular.
Yep.
I am wondering if that was all parents, both Portage and regular
Yes.
parents? I would be curious to know if you analyzed it separating out the Portage parents, and if there is a difference in how they're responding.
We have all of the data disaggregated, so I don't have it with me right now, but I'm not going to guess, but there were more than 100, it was at least 150 Portage parents who took the survey. Now, I can't pull their responses out of the overall, but I do have a disaggregated showing by each building, including Portage.
Okay, yeah, because I'm just wondering if they're happier or less happy than the general population, but you say you can't really pull them out that way.
I actually can. I do
Okay.
have the Portage, I have each building separated, I just don't have that with me this evening.
Okay, I'd love to see that
Yep,
sometime if
I'm
possible.
happy to get it for you.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments? Rob?
Also on the Pulse survey, for the parent and guardian results, I am confident that my child's school is handling the challenges to keep my child safe, 85%, which is really good. And then it's a similar question for the employees. I feel confident that the school system is creating a safe work environment. That's 68, so it's quite a bit lower. So I'm wondering if that's just because actually being in the building, there's a little bit more anxiety, or what accounts for the difference that parents think that it's safer than the staff do.
Yeah, so I think my analysis would be that you're right on. I think frankly, when you read the comments that we did from the parents, people are thrilled to have their kid back in school, right? And what they're feeling is that the general protocols that we have implemented are successful, and it does make them feel safe. It's a different piece if you're the one enforcing the protocols every day, right? And what we know from our staff survey is that this is a full-time gig, just getting people to follow the kids are doing a great job, right? They're doing an excellent job. Kids are doing very well, but there's that pressure, on us to make sure that we're following the protocols 100% of the time. And we're working with children ages 5 through 18, right? Or earlier than that, actually, because the NCEC is part of the survey as well. And I think the fatigue and the challenge of making sure that everybody is doing what they're supposed to do, that the mask isn't, below the nose. I mean, there's all those kinds of things that are part of the all day, every day that I think is just, it's wearing on our staff, as I mentioned the last time. I think people are exhausted because I'm not only teaching, right? I'm doing that normal stuff, but I'm also trying to make sure that I am helping remind people about these protocols that we know are important, but it's tiring. So I personally think, after having read all of the comments, I think that is partially where the disconnect is. In addition, there are always a little bit of differences in how people may view what is enforcement of the protocol, right? So there are different standards, right, that different people think about how this should operate and how this should operate. Some people think that the current protocols that we have are far too many. Others think maybe you could even do a little bit more. We endeavor to follow the Safe Learning Plan of Minnesota. And so I'm going to give you by way of example. An example around face shields, right? So with face shields, it says that there are some very specific situations where a person can wear a face shield as opposed to a face mask. I'll tell you this, for some people, it is never okay to wear a face shield, right? For some people, that's their expectation. But the Safe Learning Plan has a very clear set of expectations, specifically for teachers, that they have the ability to shift to a face shield when a mask would otherwise impede instruction. So sometimes you'll see people I'm welcoming kids into the class, I've got my mask on, I'm going to give direct instruction, I'm at the front of the room of the lesson, I take my mask off, I put my shield on, I deliver the lesson. As soon as the lesson's done, I put my mask back on and my face shield comes off. We also have, I'm going to say approximately 20, I'm comfortable estimating this. We have about 20 students throughout the entire district who have a medical document. We've required medical documentation to switch to a shield, right? So there's about 20 students throughout the district who have provided medical documentation that they should wear a shield versus a mask. And so, for some folks, that if you can't wear a mask, you shouldn't be here. Well, that's not the way the Safe Learning Plan works. So I think there's a couple of different parts, but I think it's that varying level of comfort with the protocols. Some people wanting a higher standard, some people thinking there could be a lower standard. And then at the same time, I think the fatigue of making sure that these things are followed appropriately is something that just wears on folks. But this is something we'll continue to come back and talk with staff about. We're going to do the same survey at 90 days, right? So we're looking for an improvement in those scores at that time. Good point on the disconnect.
Thank you, Rob. Other questions, comments? As always, thank you. And I think that one thing that I think you need to feel really good about is the parents really appreciating the level of communication that they're getting. And I think that it's really kind of finding a sweet spot of how much information you communicate, how often you do it. And I think that really continuing to fine tune how those messages are going out. I mean, the dashboard is an excellent example of how to provide that really good communication to parents and that information. And for some, again, it's too much information and some it's not enough. So I just applaud you for continuing to fine tune how we're communicating the information we're providing and being open to making changes to address. But to have 86% feeling like they're just really feel good about the level of communication, I think is really huge, besides a lot of other numbers here that are really, really good. So thank you for all that great work.
It is our pleasure to serve.
Okay, so we will move on now to the consent grouping. As a reminder, there were a few personnel items in the table file to be added to the consent grouping. Is there anything anyone would like to pull from the consent grouping for separate consideration? Okay, is there a motion to approve the consent grouping? So moved by Ellen. Is there a second? Second by Amy. All those in favor of approving the consent grouping say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We'll move on now to items for individual action. As Dr. Hillman had indicated, we will revisit the memorandum between the ALC, Randolph and Tri-City United Schools. We will present that at our next board meeting on Monday, November 9th. So our only item for individual action tonight is the World's Best Workforce. So is there a motion to approve the 2021 World's Best Workforce Annual Report as presented. Moved by Amy. Is there a second? Second by Rob. Questions, comments? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. So we'll move on now to construction update number 35. Dr. Hillman.
Yes, if we take a look at construction update number 35, we love to see those check marks checked off on 4 of the 5 buildings. And we'll see that there's the final rough-in to wall and overhead electrical work is on track to start drywalling the week of October 19th. That was last week. Taping and sanding the week of the 26th. Looking to start painting the ceilings and other painting the first week in November. Window frames and glass are on order. So you'll see there's still just a few punch list items remaining at the 3 projects that were complete. And I was the guest speaker at Rotary last week, and I did deliver an update and provide some information about the district's construction projects. We had some good photos, and that was fun to share with the community. We do have a new Matterport scan of the new Greenville Park facility, but I was just not confident I could get that to run well over Zoom to do that for the Rotarians. But we're getting that work. I don't think we've got that on the website. It is on the website, so if you take a look, we've got it updated. Remember the Matterport scans, they're the ones, it's like the Google Street View that you can go through, so you can feel free to share that with others as well. So very exciting, things are going along well. We did have to talk with, at Longfellow, we had some concerns from area learning staff about the noise at the area learning center, and there was a few parts of the project that were much louder than others, so we've spoken with them and with Knudsen, and they're going to try to make sure that anything that's really noisy is done on Wednesdays when students and staff aren't there because it's the distance learning day, and then also moving some of the items to before and after school hours. But I've been assured that the bulk of the real noisy stuff is behind us at this point. I did have a chance to tour through there about a week ago, and it's coming to life. You can see the studs are up, you can see the offices. And I toured the boardroom. As you think about, we have 4 board meetings left potentially in this space. And what I'll tell you is that the new board space looks pretty fantastic. So it's going to be a market shift for us. And I think that it's going to be something we're all going to enjoy. The new offices are looking great. Again, it's that balance between being practical and being a very good product for the community.
Excellent, thank you. Questions on the construction updates? I do appreciate Knudsen's willingness to do the Matterport. Yeah, it's just really amazing technology, and they've had to come in on weekends to do that work. So we really appreciate their efforts to do that, especially in light of not being able to have the community tour those buildings, which I know they would love to do. So it's a great way to provide that view for them. So that is it for the agenda. Thank you, everyone, for an excellent meeting. Our future meetings, Monday, November 9th. As we have discussed a few times, we have the special board meeting on Friday, November 13th at 1 p.m., which will be via Zoom, and that will be to canvass the election results. And we thank Anita. She's been doing an amazing job of keeping track of that and all of that we will have to do to do that important work of canvassing the election results. Then our other regular board meeting in the month of November is Monday, November 23rd. So regular board meetings are at 7 p.m. in the Northfield High School Media Center, and our broadcast live stream for the public. So with that, I ask for a motion to adjourn.
Jolene?
Yes.
So the special meeting, we have to come in and sign something for that, right?
Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you for reminding me of that. So it will, board members would need to come in to sign the documents, the canvassing results documents. If there is a board member who isn't able, we are able to accommodate an electronic signature. So if that's a concern or an issue, if you want to get to either myself or Anita, we can set up electronic signature for anyone who isn't able to just swing by the district office that day to do those signatures. Yes, Amy.
So
we all have to meet at the same time for the meeting and then signatures, or are we gonna meet by Zoom and then everybody comes in to sign, or?
Yes, we would meet by Zoom and then everyone during, it would have to be after the meeting.
Yep.
So it does have to be after we formally canvass the results at 1 p.m. It shouldn't take long, and then we just need a quorum for that, or does every board member need to be there? Okay, so we would just need a quorum for the 1 o'clock Zoom meeting, but then all board members are required to sign?
Whoever's in the meeting.
Okay, okay, so point of clarification then, so we will have the 1 o'clock Zoom meeting on Friday, November 13th. If any board members aren't able to be there, if you want to let me know, that would be great. And again, we just need quorum, so we need 4 of us that would be available, and then in turn, those 4, whomever is in the Zoom meeting, would then need to come to the district office to sign, or in the case if you're not able to do that, we are able to do electronic. We just decided if it's not a huge inconvenience for board members to just swing in and sign those documents at the district office.
And it doesn't have to be all at the same time, it's
No.
whenever you can get there that
Right.
afternoon after that.
And Anita, you're in the office till 4 p.m.? So it would be between, the meeting itself shouldn't be long, so I would imagine the earliest you could get to the district office would likely be around 1:30, and then get there by 3:45 between that time. So if that's problematic for anyone, let me know, because again, we're just required a quorum, so. Good, thanks Tom for that clarification. So we have a motion to adjourn? Yes, it was moved by Tom, is there a second? Second by Jeff. So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.